And hello everybody, welcome back to a new video. So today we're going to be going through everything about HTML, from what it is to how to use it and things like this. This is a crash course and you are free to go watch the actual videos port by port by clicking on these pop-ups that come up on the screen. One is for HTML and the other one will be for HTML5. It's playlists. You can go watch one by one, or you can watch them like this. Now, no need to explain, everything will be explained in the video. Let's get started. What is HTML? HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. HTML is basically what you use to create web page, like how you put on the text on a web page or links. Now, what are the few things that you can make using HTML? First off, and probably the most obvious, is you can make web pages with HTML, like add a few videos, add some text, maybe an image here and there. Next, I'd say you can make a few games with HTML, but to do that you'll need to learn things like JavaScript and maybe a bit of CSS just to like help you along with it. But you can't make a game with just HTML, just saying that. And that's basically all the main focus around it, because it's basically just to make web pages. You don't really need to think about games, because when you learn JavaScript, the HTML will help you create the games and stuff like that. Now, here is the modern web structure of these days, like where everything fits into each other. Now, first off comes HTML. This is the structure of the page, words get selected into it, and maybe a few videos and stuff like that. Then you get CSS, which is the presentation, which changes the look of the whole web page, making it more beautiful and stuff like that. Then comes JavaScript, which controls the behavior of this whole thing. Like, let's say there is a car that should move whenever you like scroll there and click play, then a car will start moving or something like that. Or that's what I guess. I haven't studied JavaScript yet. Then PHP or other similar to that is basically for the back end of the page. I have no idea what that is, so we will get to that when I start studying PHP. And CMS is the content management, which, if I have to guess, is probably like videos, images, or things like that. I have not studied CMS yet. And HTML is a very easy language to learn, and it's very fast. Not a lot of, you don't have to put a lot of like ton of effort into it, but you can still like learn it. Like, it took me just a few months to get it in. I didn't really study constantly on it. I went like little step by little step. So on the day it's actually very easy. And yeah, the basic HTML structure. Now, the way that I was taught that actually helped me quite a lot was the HTML structure is basically like a sandwich. Everything goes inside of it, where HTML is like the buns, if we can put it like that. Now, HTML starts the page, basically. That is the page. Everything goes into the HTML because it starts the page, obviously. Now, this thing and those two means the two is totally different. For example, this one opens up the page, it starts it, and that one closes it or ends it. Now, this is so with most of the things, but not everything, but still with most. Now, as you can see, HTML without the slash in front of it means start the page, opens the page, whatever you want to call it. Now, HTML with the slash in front of it, that means close the page slash end the page. Now this is just the outside of the page. This constructs the whole thing. Now let's go over to the head. Okay, now what you do is you put in a head, same as the HTML starts off with the same bigger as and smaller as stuff, and ends off with the slash, all the basic normal stuff and all of that. Now inside of the head is most like the titles and the heading and stuff like that. Now while I was editing this, I saw that I actually made a mistake in this whole HTML thing that I'm trying to explain. I never closed off the head. Don't make that mistake, guys. If you're going to do that, it's probably something going to be wrong. But next is the body. In here comes basically everything. This is like the meat of the hamburger and stuff like that. Now in the body you can find the text, the paragraphs, the videos, the images, everything basically. Not exactly everything, but mostly everything. Creating our very first web page using HTML. Now there are quite a couple of applications you can use. We'll be using Notepad, but because I like using Notepad, but you can use things like Delphi 10, Sublime Text, and all of those applications, as long as it supports HTML. Now let's get started. Okay, so now let's start off the HTML page. If you don't know how to do that, please go watch part 2. Now you can start your HTML, capital letters or without capital letters, and we can close it off. Okay, now let's make the head and the body. You should know how to do this. If you don't yet, please go watch part 2. Okay, so we'll just be making a simple line of text, nothing add or anything like that. So just go into the body and write your text. Now for future references, please don't actually do it like this. We will show you how to actually do it correctly in one of the future parts. But for now, you can just do it like this, no problem. Okay, now I'll be showing you how to save it correctly. You gotta save it exactly like I do, otherwise it won't actually work. Now go to Files, say Save, now give it a name, whatever, and save it as .htm or .html. Okay, now that you've done that, go and find the folder where you saved it in, and just double tap on it and open it. Now when you open it, it should try and open a web browser. It will open Chrome for me because that is my default web browser right now. Okay, so here's the text we just entered. As you can see, also that URL is where it is in your files. Now we want to change the title. Now the title is this thing. Okay, to do the title we have to start working the head. Now in those bigger as and smaller as things, put in title next to each other, open it and close it, and then in there you put in whatever title you want. Now very important again, you need to save it. Try and learn the Control S so you don't have to do this all the time. If you don't save it, it won't quite work out. Now you see that? Now refresh the page and voila, it changed. Beautiful. Paragraphs and line breaks. So let's get right into it and make some new content. Okay, so let's start. Okay, so let's start off by creating our HTML. You should know how to do this. If you don't, then you probably need to go watch my other tutorials. Okay, now about the P element. The P element stands for paragraph. The paragraph makes everything in a paragraph basically. If you create two P elements, it will come out as a paragraph underneath a paragraph and stuff like that. Now to create a P element, start off with making the bigger as sign, put in a P, close it off with the smaller as, or whichever way it goes over. Now then you insert a bigger as again, slash P smaller as, and that will create your first paragraph. Now you just type in it and it will create a paragraph for you. Now I'm going to create another paragraph underneath that so I can see that there are paragraphs basically made now. And then I'll save it, open it up as HTML, and then we can see how the paragraphs looks. Okay, now as you can see, there are two paragraphs here. There's a little space between them and all of that. It looks beautiful. Now let's go on to the break line. Okay, now the line break has no closing element, so whatever you type, whenever you do it, you just have to say you just give the element there, and it will automatically break the paragraph into two separate pieces. So you don't have to like put it somewhere in between. I don't know if we probably haven't studied text formatting yet, but it's not like the P. Let's say it's not like the P. You only have to type it once. Now what you do is you type your text, and wherever you want it to like break into the next line, you start off with a bigger ass. You put in a BR slash or space slash, doesn't matter, and you close it off, and then it gives you a line break. Okay, now let's check it out. As you can see, there's a break in the lines, but it's not as big as the paragraph spaces because it's technically still in the same line. I will be not explaining, but showing you a few fonts on HTML. Now, this is also coming in like when you like start studying CSS and stuff. But for right now, we're just going to start with HTML. So we're going to like learn the different types of fonts you can like add and all of that. Pretty cool stuff. Now let's start off by creating the HTML page. Okay, so first we'll be doing a bit of bold. Now to do bold, you put it in a paragraph and everything. Then the same with the paragraph, it's just a B this time, and it will make the text bold. You can put it in the middle of a sentence. You can put it anywhere, and whatever in it will be in bold. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to like put a few paragraph starters and stuff just to get them started, because this is going to take a while if I'm going to do it all one by one and stuff like that. So I'm just going to start it off. I suggest you do it too if you're typing this out right now. Okay, now next up is big. Big is almost like bold, but it's not really bold. It's actually really big text. Not very big, but it is bigger. Now remember with these, they're all just like the paragraph elements. They all come in those bigger as and smaller as things. All of them are exactly like that. Next is italic text. Now this is those that lies like a little bit sideways. Looks a little bit weird. Yeah, these are those. Next up is small text. Now small text is like big text, but opposite. It's smaller than the rest. Okay, now it is strong text. Now this is basically bold. It's just another word. There's no real difference between this and bold, so I'd rather use bold, but some people decide that they rather want to use strong. Now this is subscripted text. I don't know what is so special about it or anything. I can't really see a difference when I look at it, but it is part of the HTML fonts that you get, so it's still there, still gotta use it. Okay, this is inserted text. This is the text where there's a line underneath it. Yeah, it's pretty nice and all. Next up is deleted text. Now this is the text with like a line through it, not underneath it, through it. Okay, so that's about all of them. There's another one called Superscript, but you don't need to know that one, because it's the same as, you know, the subscripted, to me at least. So let's save it and open it up, and let's see how it looks. So there you can see how everything looks. You can maybe decide if something doesn't look the same and I said it did or whatever. Okay, so let me explain to you like how they work first. H1 is a heading. H2 is heading. It goes all the way to H6. H1 is the biggest heading you can get. H2 is a little bit smaller, but it's still quite big. H3 is it's almost normal basically. H4 I think is around normal to small. H5 is smaller, and H6 I think is also smaller. It must be smaller because the higher the number, the smaller it gets. Now these are just like the fonts that I did in the last video. If you haven't watched it, please go watch it. It will help you a little. Now basically this is just like something small, just to show you basically how they work. Okay, now headings basically work. Wait, first let's create the HTML page and stuff. Now I'm going to show you all the headings from the biggest to the smallest. I'm going to give you a few examples and then I'll show you how it looks like, so you can like just get it, just like see how it works. Now first thing, we can just like add a title, not necessary, but just so it's there at least. And yeah, I will catch you after I have copied everything and pasted everything and all of that. Okay, now that we have set everything, just add some text to it. No problem, nothing. It should look fine now, there shouldn't be a problem. Let's quickly see. There you go. See, isn't that beautiful? Now you can see the different sizes and all there is. Usually for a page you use H1. If you like want to have a big heading and you don't know CSS, you use H1. Then yeah, it's pretty nice. So next up is horizontal lines. Okay, now horizontal lines are very easy. You open it, you put an HR in, you put a slash in, and you close it up. There, boom, horizontal line. Now this will make a horizontal line across your page, and a full one, 100% full. And yeah, see, there you go. And you can also add spaces between the HR and the slash. Some people like doing that, but I don't like it. It doesn't look nice, for me at least. But you can do it, there's no problem with that. Okay, and now for comments. Now, if you haven't noticed, I have been adding comments the whole time, with the opening bigger as an exclamation mark and two of those stripe thingies. I don't know what to call them in English. And then you end it off with those stripe thingies and a closing bracket thingy. So that is a comment. There's no other way of making it. With Java I know there's like 2 to 3 ways. I think it's only 2. With Delphi there's 3 ways as far as I know. But with HTML there's only 1 way. And this covers multiple lines. So wherever you close it off is wherever the comment ends. And see, it won't show up on the page because it's a comment. You can put it anywhere, it won't matter because it's technically not being read. We'll be covering attributes. Now, a little bit about attributes. They are like they tell basically what the content on an HTML must do. Like, must it be in the center, or must it be to the left side of the page? You know, those type of things. So let's create our HTML page and get started. Also, another thing, if you haven't watched my previous video, it was about headings, comments, and those type of things. I do recommend that you do. This will help you a little bit with this one and all the other ones that's coming out as well. And yeah, just wanted to announce that one there. Okay, now there are a lot of values to attributes. Right now we'll be just doing the center value basically. We'll be aligning a paragraph to the center. So let's just create a paragraph and then quickly save it so we don't lose anything. Remember, if you don't know how to save it, just save it with a .html when you do. Not by .text, by .html. Because if you don't know that, it means you haven't watched my earlier video. So please go watch it. It's really important for future references, as we can say. Okay, now to align something to the center, go to your P element and type in align equals in quotation marks center. So this will align your text to the center. You can do this with a lot of things, not just the P element. And you'll learn a lot more about these and understand it a little bit more once we get started with CSS. But that will be still quite a while. Now, basically, it is really easy to understand actually. Align just tells you where it should be and center says where it should be aligned to. I don't really know how else to explain that to you, but yes, that is how I can understand it myself. I have never really tried to understand it, but they say it as align is the name equals the value. So it's name equals value. Align is name, value is center. You see? Next up, we're going to do a little bit of the horizontal lines. We're going to change them up a bit. Like if you've seen my last video, you know how to make them. Now, what we'll be doing is we'll be making the line a bit shorter. We'll be making the width not as long. So to do this, you make your horizontal line, and inside of it you say width, that's the attribute name, equals 50 px. Px stands for pixels. Now this will make it as long as 50 pixels. I think you can actually make pixels centimeters as well. I'm unsure, but I think you can. And yeah, see, there's the normal horizontal line. Now if we edit it, you'll see it has shortened. Okay, now as you can see, it is pretty short now. So let's go on to the next one. It's still horizontal lines though. We're going to turn the width into percentages. Now, the same thing, but just this time just with a percentage mark. We're going to make it 50%, so it's just going to take up 50% of the screen. Width, that is. And see, this is really easy to actually understand. If you're still struggling with it, just tell me and I will explain it a bit better to you. As you can see, it's only 50% of the screen's width now. Okay, so now let's take what we have learned and use it on another horizontal line. Remember, we can align almost anything and we can change almost anything's width as well. An attribute can go almost with anything on HTML. So let's do a horizontal line. I want you guys to do the same whenever you can. Take a time off, take like just an hour, and just make random stuff with it. Just practice it, just try something new. Maybe you learn something that I don't know about, and then you can even teach me. So let's just make something small, just using everything that we already have. Okay, now that's sure to be teaching you something a little bit. Now we will be doing the adding the image to the HTML web page thing. You know, pretty cool, all of that. Now, one thing I just want to add is I'm doing it without any background music, because in my earlier videos, when I like watch them again just to like see if they're all okay and stuff, the music in the video kind of like bothered me because I couldn't really concentrate on what I was saying. So there's going to be a poll that's going to ask you if you want there to be music in the tutorials, or if you like it if there's no music in it. Okay, now without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so first up we're going to try and get an image onto the web page from the web itself, meaning it's not coming from your files or anything, it's coming from the internet itself. So let's just go search up a random image or something, and then we can add it into this, and I'll show you everything. Let's just first get that image. Okay, now I think this is the first time we are going to be doing sources. Now, sources is where whatever it is you're using is coming from. Like if you have an image, there's usually a link, which is the source of the image, like from where it begins and stuff like that. Now, I'm going to copy that link, and it's going to give me a source, like a source link, and I'm going to put that into the code, and it will give me the image. But there's specific things you have to put in first. Now, first off, let's go get the link. Also, one thing to know: if you go to do not, and I mean do not, copy the link from here. If you're going to try and copy anything from here, you're just going to get a basic error. What you want to do is you want to find the image you're looking for and actually click on it and go to the to the site itself. I prefer making in specific amino for whatever you're trying to do, because I find it really useful when I try to search my things up and I go to amino where they give you a link and all of those things. I upload my images there, and so I'm going to copy the image, and I'm going to show you how to put in the code and everything. Okay, so here I found my image. It is from my Steve's Teacher amino. Now I'm going to just copy this link, and I'm going to show you guys how to insert an image. Okay, now to start off, you open it, you put in img for image, and then here's the source, SRC. It stands for source. This is where you paste the link. You put in equal and quotation marks thingies, and then just paste it in, and boom, there you should be able to use it. Now you just close it off, and that is basically the image. So let's just quickly open up this HTML and see how it looks. Okay guys, also in the alt attribute, I seem to have left it out in this tutorial. It is very important. If the image cannot be displayed onto the web page, then the alt attribute will basically tell the person, hey, this image is probably not broken or something. We don't know what's wrong, but it doesn't work. So it's the same. So after you paste the source code, you say alt equals quotation marks. Inside of that, you say whatever it should say whenever the image doesn't show. Or I think at least that's what it does, but it probably does. And now guys, when you want to like get an image from gallery, let's say you already have it there. Now what you want to do is it's the same process. Everything is exactly the same except its source. I prefer that if you keep the image in the same file to make it easier for everyone, or especially for you. And when you like zip the file or something, it's also easy and all of that. Now you give it an easy name like let's say it's about a person, it's like your girlfriend. You give it a name like gf.jpg, png, whatever comes after the dot. And it's the same thing with the source code, except instead of a link, if it's in the same folder, then you put in the name instead of a link. Like let's say it's gf.jpg. Then in the source you put in gf.jpg. Like I'm going to put in my beautiful waifu virgo.jpg, and I'm going to put it into this web page. Now to do that, it's going to be the source code is going to be virgo.jpg. Spell it correctly. If you don't, it's not going to work. Now if it's not in the same folder, you should direct the path to it, like let's say it is desktop slash something slash then the image name. I don't do that because it's too complicated for me. I don't like it. It's too much effort. I'd rather get it from the internet or just put it in the same folder. And that will be like doing the image resizing. Like let's say you don't want it that big on your web page. It's too big, you don't want it, it looks bad, or you want it bigger or even smaller or whatever. And so you want to change like the height or the width or just something just so it doesn't look that big or that small. Now let's get right to that part. Okay, we'll start off with the height. It's the same thing with the source. Everything's like the same way put out. It's like height equals and whatever. Now this is like the text, like the fonts. It can be px, it can be percentage, it can be all of those things, and the same with the width. Now you probably know what height and width is. Height is y, is the y-axis. Width is the x-axis. Now you see I made it smaller. Now I used px, but I can use percentages as well. Pixels just say how many pixels it is, and that's all. Now remember, here you can't use centimeters as far as I know. You can probably, I don't know, but for safety's sake I'll just say you can't. You can test it out by yourself. Maybe it does work, and I don't know because I haven't tested it out. I just use pixels or percentage, and here you can resize the image to whatever you want. And see, it's really simple, guys, and it's not hard to grasp. So it's just height and width, and both of them have equal marks, and you just put in the number that you want them to be in. Like if you want it to be 50 pixels, 50%, whatever, it will be as you want it. You can also add borders, guys. Now this is to like give it like a black thing around it. Like you see that little black line that appeared. You can make it bigger with pixels. I'm going to just make it bigger so you guys can see. See, that's a border. And let's review what we have learned, guys. Okay, so first off, we learned about images, how to add them with sources, like use their source, stuff like that. src, main word. src equals quotation marks, and put in the link or the file path. If it's in the same folder, then you can just give it the name and it will automatically appear. If it's not in the same folder, you have to direct it to the right file, otherwise it won't find it. So after that, we learned about the height, width, and alt. So the image height is the y-axis, how big it is from bottom to top, from top to bottom, how long it is and stuff like that. Width is from left to right, x-axis. Now height and width you can change with pixels and percentages, but remember, if the image is big, the web page will take longer to load due to the image being bigger and need to take more data to load it. So use that with care, guys. Don't make it too big, but don't make it too small. Now next up is the alt. Let's review that. The alt is for in case the image does not show on the web page. If, let's say, the person's web browser doesn't support images, I don't know why it won't, but you never know, then you just add the alt, and if I'm correct, you put words in it, it will make the words pop up and be like, hey, this image isn't working, get a new browser. And then we get to borders. Borders are black lines around whatever you have inserted. We have inserted an image, so the black line around the images, making it look better somehow, kinda, not really, but also making it more its own thing, making it look more like it stands at one side and not just camouflage itself in with everything else. And that's about all, guys. We have just done about everything we do need to know. And I hope this tutorial was helpful for you guys and you didn't struggle too much understanding anything. If you do have struggles, feel free to comment down below and I will re-explain it for you guys in a different way. In link is basically, it's just going to take you somewhere. You gotta put it in a paragraph and then you'll just show the link, or you can do it my style. Now you put in a, which basically stands for which basically opens up the link tags basically. Then inside of the first A you type href, which stands for hypertext reference, if I'm correct, and put an equal sign in quotation marks, put the link inside of that. Now if you're not going to put something between the two A's, it's not going to show. If you just want the link to show, as I said, just do it in a paragraph then. But me, I want the link to have like words. Now, if you click on the words, it will take you to the link. For example, subscribe to Netsusama. That's me. Now I wanted to show that. Now in between the A's I'm going to write that, but before I do that I'm quickly going to save. After I save, I'm going to put it in between the two A's and then you will see what I mean. Okay, now that we've opened up, let's put inside subscribe to me, not Netsusama, because I feel that might be a little bit offensive to some weebs. Now if you refresh it, there you can see subscribe to me. Now if I'm going to type on that, it's going to take me directly to it. Now I don't want it opening up on the same page, because if it's going to open up on the same page, I'm going to get really irritated because I have to go back to this page again. And I don't want to do that now, do I? Because I'm a lazy person. I just want to make it open up on a new tab. Now what we'll be doing is we'll just giving it a target. Now a target is telling it basically where to go. So in the code, in the same first A tag, put in target equals quotation marks, or not quotation marks, it's your choice. I put in quotation marks just for safety, underscore blank. This will basically open it up on a blank page, or in other words, a new tab. Now let's try it again and see if it opens up on a new tab. So there it's loaded, and as you can see, there it is. Let's click on that and boom, it opens up on a new tab, making my life easier. HTML lists. Now lists are incredibly easy, you don't have to worry, it's really easy to just grasp it. Now put in the title and everything. Today right now we'll be starting with ordered lists. Now ordered lists are lists that starts from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So to do an ordered list, you open the tag and stuff, you put in an OL. OL stands for ordered list. Now this just says, hey, this is going to be a list now. Now the next thing you need to do because it's just going to, it's not going to happen if you don't, if you just leave it like that. So next thing you gotta do is you gotta put in an li. This basically says, hey, this is the first part of the list, then the next part. Each li is the next number, like 1 is li with something in it, 2 is the li underneath that li, and so on and so forth. Then will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so this is an ordered list. Now let's quickly see how this looks after we've added about 3 of them, maybe a few colors and stuff. Then we can see how it looks. Okay, so instead of colors, let's make it easier to understand. Let's make it like a grocery list or like a to-do list. Yeah, let's do that. So this will make it a little bit easier for you to understand once you've seen it. Okay, and here we go. See, 1, get food. 2, make food. 3, eat the food. See, it's ordered. It's 1, 2, 3. Now we're gonna stay here. We're gonna go further. Now is an unordered list. To do the unordered list, it's not OL, it's UL. But the inside of it is exactly the same. It's still LI with everything in it. The only difference between ordered and unordered lists so far for you to know is that an unordered list has like those dots, those circles in the front and not numbers. So it's basically the same. One just has numbers, the other one has circles. Okay, now as you can see, it has circles and, you know, so there's no numbers. But you can also make them squares by putting, when inside the UL tag, you say type equals square. The ordered list, you can also make those Roman numbers like the I's and stuff. If you go type type I. That's an ordered list because that's still ordered. And stuff like that. You can test it out yourself. Tables, you know, where you put your data in, there's like a bunch of squares, put your stuff in the squares, you know, that type of thing. Yes, we'll be doing the tables. Now to make a table, you have the table tag. Now what the table tag will do is will open up your table, but remember, with the table tag you actually close off the table, so you gotta put in that slash table. Then inside of the table tag, you will have to put in the TR tag. This stands for table row. Like the first row, then it has things underneath it. Second row, things underneath it. Now inside of the TR tag, which will create the table row, you're going to put in TD. Now what TD will do is TD will fill that row up, like from left to right, it will fill it up. Until you put in another TR, they will go one row down, and then you can put another TD that will fill that row up. TD stands for table data. This makes it a bit easier since you put your data inside that square, and that square is the TD. Okay, so let's quickly make one, and we'll give it 3 TDs, which will make it have 3 things underneath the row. As you can see, there's nothing yet because I haven't added anything inside of the TD yet. Okay, now let's see how it looks. As you can see, there it is. You can't yet see the border because it is invisible. I'll show you how to make sure you can see the border. Now go to table, and in table type border and make it equal to 2. This will make the border equal to 2 pixels. Okay, now as you can see, the border is 2 pixels big. Now I'm going to show you how to make the TD span more than one cell. Now the square is called a cell. Now I'm going to show you how to make one go through 2 cells. So like one square makes 2 cells full. So we're going to make another TR, which will give us a row underneath that one. Then we're going to put in 2 TD tags. And the one we're just going to... No, the first one isn't going to be very interesting. It's just going to have basically nothing in it. Nothing important in it. Then the next TD tag, we shall add a call span which is equal to 2. The call span makes it span a column, like one cell extra. So as you can see, now there's nothing special, and there's one empty square. We don't want that, so we're going to go to the second TD tag. Then within that TD tag, we're going to say call span equals 2, which will make it fill up more than one column. Okay, as you can see, it spans to more than one column, showing you how there is no line between them, which makes it as big as that. Now I will teach you how to align the table to the center. You should technically know how to do this, considering you've been with my tutorials up until now. If you haven't, I'll show you. So in the table, before or after border, it doesn't really matter. Put it in a line tag. Equal it to the center. That's really all there is to it. Really easy. Okay, now it is possible to change the background color of an TD element. So let's make red by adding the BG color equals red. This stands for background color equals red. This works just in the HTML. You can do it using CSS, which is easier, but we'll learn that later. So let's make them all their actual colors, and that's where we'll end it off. Types of elements. So you can get two different types of elements. You get block level elements and inline elements. Now, block level elements are basically like a container, we can say, and it contains something in it. For example, the P element contains text in it. The H1 element contains text in it as well, but it just makes it a little bit bigger. Now you get a lot of them, like for example H1 form, or H1 to 6 actually, form, LI, for lists, OL also list, UL also list, P, pre, table, and div, and so on and so forth. Now these all start on new lines, which means that these ones you cannot put it in. You cannot have a P element and then inside of the P element you put an LI element. You can't do that. It has to be on its own. Now there is one exception to this. Everything needs to be on a new line, these block elements. Now this one is the div. If you have a div, you can put things in it. For example, the P element, pre element, you can put anything inside of a div. It's the only block line element that can contain other block line elements. Then we get the inline elements. Now these elements, they're displayed without line breaks, meaning it doesn't start on a new line. Also meaning you can use it inside, like the P element for example. At least most of it, then you can. Now these are like the B for bold, A for in hyperlink, strong also bold. Then you can also get things like images, input, embedded text, and span, and so on and so forth. Now let's look at an example of it. So first we'll be making a div. Now a div is mostly actually used as a container for other elements. Now we're going to put in H1 above the div, and then we're going to make the div the color green with some white text inside of it. So you should all actually know how to do this by now, but if you don't, you can just watch on and see how. Okay, now we'll be looking at some inline elements. For now we'll be looking at the span element. What we'll be doing is we'll be putting a paragraph here, H2 size, that's nice and big, and then we're going to make important in red. This is inline, so this will be used inside of the block line element, which is H2. Now, we all know how to change the text color. We all should. If you haven't watched my earlier videos, please do, because they will teach you how to use this. So we're going to make it some important text. Important will be red. The inline elements will allow us to make the text red. And the inline element is inside of the block line elements. It can never just be the inline element. Okay, now that we have the text here, we'll be making the important red. Now you should know how to do this already. You don't just say style equals quotation marks and just say color, the two dots, and the color you want it. Now this should make it red, but remember this is an inline element, which means it will only change the importance. It will not change anything outside of it. If you did this to a blockline element, the H2 will basically change everything, unless it's like a div. If you put another blockline element inside of a div, then that blockline element won't be specifically affected by the div unless you specify that it should be. Now, you get some elements that can be seen as inline and blockline elements. Now, you can use them in both, that's what I mean. So these are like applet, which allows you to code Java, like put embedded Java into the code. You get iframe, which is an inline frame. You get ins, which allows you to put inserted text. You get map, or an image map. You get object, or an embedded object. And then you get script, to put script within an HTML document. This is mostly used when you want to put JavaScript into the HTML itself and not in a different folder, or a different file, not a different folder. And that's all for today, guys. I hope you learned something new and that this wasn't too confusing. Now, today we'll be doing forms. Now, forms is a way of collecting information from the user. Now, when we start a form, we usually want people to go somewhere whenever they finish filling in the form, right? Now, to do that, inside the form, you give it an attribute called action equals, in quotation marks, with the link you want it to take them after they have finished, you know, the whole thing, because there's going to be things like buttons with, you know, open space, type in your name, press the button. After I press the button, they're going to go to now my channel. Now you get two types of very important attributes. You get, or method attributes. You get and post. Now when you use get, the data on the information will be visible. Like any information they put into the bars and stuff, it will be visible. Post is when you're trying to hide something like sensitive information, for example passwords. It offers security because it's not visible to the page address. Next up is input. Now input is basically any information that gets put in. For example, passwords, radio buttons, submit button, and so on and so forth. Anything that has some sort of input value. Okay, now you get different input types. Now input types, you put in something like type and equally to something like text, password, or something like that, you know, and then you give it a name, for example username, so it's specifically made for a person's username. As you can see here, we have a text box. In there we can put in our username, for example. Okay, now let's say we want to get the user's username and password. So then we're going to give it a type password, which means he's going to put in his password there. We're going to give it a name like password as well. Now this is going to be an input box specifically made for his password. So in the name you can put in anything there, and in the password it won't even show because it's kept private now. Okay, next up is radio buttons. Just so you can know the difference between a radio button and a checkbox is radio buttons allows you to only choose one of the two. A checkbox allows you to choose both of the options you get. You can obviously have more than one option, but let's say you sell tires, but you don't want people to buy multiple tires for different occasions because you want to be a douchebag. Now you give them a radio button, meaning if they want to buy one, they can only choose one of those two. If you give them a checkbox otherwise, then they will be able to choose both of those two types of tires and not just one. You follow me? Okay, now let's do the radio button. Now the type is radio, the name we can make that gender, and the value must always change depending on what it is. So we're going to make the value a male. Now we're going to, outside of the checkbox, we're going to add text male, which will allow the person to see that this radio button, was made for the guy. And then underneath that we're going to give it another input, type radio for radio button. The name's going to be gender since it's in the same category basically. And the value is going to be female. Note the value is different. The value isn't male this time, it's female. The value can also be something like number 1, number 2, or anything as long as it allows you to set them apart. The name only links more than one of the two options. Now the same thing, we're going to put the female text outside of the box. This will allow the text to be next to the radio button. Okay, now as you can see, you can only select one of these two options. Now let's go to the checkbox. It is the same story, but instead of radio, it has checkbox. And we're just going to change the value to 1 and 2. Okay, now as you can see here, I can be male and female. The checkbox allows you to choose more than one. The radio button only allows you to choose one. You catch my drift? Okay, now we're at the submit button. Now, the submit button is actually just mostly known as a button or submit because you submit the form. you submit the form to someone like your boss, for example. Not really. Now to do the submit, you give an input and then you make a type submit and a value submit. Now the value will be the name displayed on the button. You can make the value whatever you want if you want to change the name. Okay, now just take note. Whenever you create a form, put everything inside of that one form. Don't make multiple forms like I did, because this was only for an example. But you actually put all of these inside of one form, since it's all meant for one specific thing. Okay, now here, as you can see, we have a submit button. Also guys, before I go, there's one more thing. If you put inside an input required equals required, then if they don't fill in that field, it's going to give them a pop-up that says this field is required and they have to fill it in. Thank you all for watching. I hope you all learned something new today, and see you all in the next tutorial. Okay, now a thing to note about HTML colors are that they are hexadecimal. This means they go from 0 to 9 and A to F, or if you want to be more specific, from 0 to F. Now you get the lowest values, which is 0. Now if you like put hashtag 000 next to each other, that will give you black. Hashtag if gives you white. Now as you can see, they go from dark to light. 0 darkest, if brightest. Now you might know that they are red, green, blue organized. Now there's another way to do this, which uses, instead of the hashtag value, you actually have the option to go RGB, which means red, green, blue, and you can put your values inside of there as well. Okay, now let's focus a little bit more on the hexadecimal values. Now you might know the RGB. So the first two letters, those are red, middle letters are green, last letters are blue. That's how they work. Now here are a few examples. Hashtag double F 4 zeros, that is FF0000, that gives you red. Okay, you guys may get a little bit confused with all of this. Now how it works is, as you know, FF is lightest, F is always lightest, 0 is darkest. Now double F means brightest red, 0000 means no black, no blue, no green, and that is why that's the double F will make it red. Next is another basic, 00FF00. This will give you green, same reason as like with red, and the same thing goes with blue, 0000FF, that gives you blue. Okay, black is pretty easy. It is just a bunch of zeros, because 0 is darkest of everything. Since everything is at its darkest, it creates black. Now gray is just a bunch of 7s. It's a little bit harder to remember, but it's good to note that it does exist. Next up is white. It's just a bunch of Fs. Like, as you know, F creates white. The F is the lightest of something. So if everything is at its lightest, it creates white. Now with all this knowledge, you can create your own colors. For example, hashtag C1250F. This will give you an orange and red mix. Now you can create your own colors with whatever you want, and basically you just have to try and imagine it. If you will be becoming better with this once we get into CSS. So right now you don't have to worry that much about it, but remember, just keep this in mind because this is still the basics of HTML. So it's the basic of what is about to come. Nothing's here because it was all in a comment. So if you don't have anything because you did exactly the same as me, don't worry. Okay, so now let's try and actually use it. So what I want to do is we want to make the background of the whole web page like a slightly darkish blue. So we go bg color equals, and then we insert the decimals, and we basically, you can make it however you want. I want it to be kind of dark, so I'm going to not go into A yet. I'm still going to be with the numbers. As you can see, it's nice and dark. Now let's do the fonts. Like, you know, text, we want the text to be white. Okay, now let's create an H1. Now inside of the H1 we're going to put white headline. This will give us black heading. We don't want a black heading, so around white headline we're going to put font. Remember to close it off because this is going to be important. Font is what we use to specify something to do with the text. Font can also be replaced by things like span, bold, anything in that, you know, type of thing. But font is actually mainly used for something like this. Now in there we're going to make it color equals hashtag and or 6 ifs. Now this will give us a white heading, and that's what we want. Now yeah, that's about all guys. So I hope you all learned something new here. This should be pretty easy after you've tried. You can do the same thing with RGB. It's up to you. RGB, however, does go from 0 to 225. I mean 255. It does not, however, go into the alphabet. That's all you need to note, guys, and that should be all you need to know for now. So today we'll be doing HTML5 for the first time, guys. Now this is saved on the same way that an HTML would be saved. So you don't have to worry about like changing the background or the extension to like HTML5 or something, because as you will see right now, it is saved as .html. So yeah, right there it says .html. You don't have to do anything special. The only thing that changes HTML from HTML5 inside of the code that will allow you to like add HTML5 attributes and stuff to HTML here will be the Doctype Html. Now this is extremely important and you must remember this. If you don't remember this, then you won't be able to do HTML5. Okay guys, this is what allows you to do HTML5. If this isn't at the top of your page, you can't do HTML5. It will see your file that you want to add as unsupported unless the file is supported in HTML, which is the beginner step. We are now a little bit more advanced and we'll be going in a little bit deeper. Now here are a few things that you'll start learning in the new HTML5 course. Okay, so there are article, assign, audio, canvas, data list, details, embed, footer, header, nav, output, progress, section, video. Now I'm not going to explain what all of these are just yet. They will be explained in future videos and you'll understand more about them later on. Now creating the HTML body, like you remember last time, head, body and all of that, the mains are pretty much the same, basically exactly the same. For example, head is still head, inside there's still title, and then there's body. Later on we'll get a little bit in deeper and we'll add things like the header, the footer, the side, those things will make the body be a little bit bigger. And also, one thing you're going to have to start doing to make your code a little bit better is you have to start indenting your code. This means whenever you're like inside, let's say the head tag or the body tag, you press tab and it will shoot the text forward a bit so you can see what is inside of what. Now every time you put something inside of two tags, opening and closing, you do that, and this is like a P tag where there will only be text. Like as you can see with my title, everything is going to be inside of there. Now this is actually all up to you. You don't have to do this, but it is highly recommended that you do, so it's good practice. Because if you can do this, then you will look like a more professional programmer in the future when like JavaScript and stuff. People look for your code and be like, wow, this guy's code looks beautiful, So today we're talking about the list of content models in HTML5. This isn't particularly important, but it's just for some background so you can know what's going on. Okay, so first off, let's start with the head. The head usually includes things like the base, link, metadata, no script, script, style, and title, but not always. Now, as I said before, these are not that important. You don't need to know these out of your head. Now, these aren't extremely important just yet. We'll be getting into more detail with most of these, especially when we go into CSS and JavaScript. For example, the links, the no script, script, meta, and stuff like that. Now, you all probably already know about the title, so I don't have to explain that. And most of these I won't be explaining just yet. For now, you just actually have to know more about link and style, which is actually not right now that important, but just so that you know. Now, link is basically to link a CSS file, which we'll be getting into more into CSS. These can also be used to link outside files that is not CSS, for example, Bootstrap, which we will be getting into later on, maybe before we go to the CSS. Then style is just to put CSS into. We'll also be getting more into that when we get to CSS. Then another thing that can be pretty important is the script tag, which will also include JavaScript. This is not important for you right now, but it is useful to know that it does exist. And if you do know some JavaScript, you can test out of it. For example, the alert function or the console.log function, if you know how it works. Now, something that can be really annoying and you should watch out for is putting the title tag at the top and not doing what I just did right here. I did it once and I really didn't get the result I wanted, because the title tag for some reason should always be at the top, right underneath the head tag. Otherwise there's a problem, and I made this mistake and I don't want you to make the same mistake. So remember to always put the title tag at the top. Okay, now let's continue. Next up is the body. Now the body usually holds the things that are embedded. These will include audio, video, canvas, iframe, images, math, object, and SVG. Now the only actual important ones of these are video, audio, canvas, yeah, maybe, image, and SVG. The rest you will barely ever use, so you don't really have to know them, but just for in case, because you might be one of those that actually enjoy using those and will actually try and use those. But I have never used the math tag, the object tag, the iframe tag, or actually the canvas tag in any of my code so far. Now next up is the interactive. These usually include elements like A for link, audio, video, button, details, embed, iframe, image, input, label, object, select, or text area. They are actually specifically meant for user interaction. So these are quite easy to remember, but you don't actually need to like remember these. For example, metadata, embed, interactive, and stuff like you don't need to remember those. They're just like for some background detail, so you do know these things falls into those categories. Now next category is heading. Now we all know a heading is from H1 to H6. You don't know, please go watch my earlier tutorials. Now this isn't hard at all, so we can just skip through this one. Next up is sectioning content. These are extraordinarily useful in HTML5. These are elements like article, aside, nav, and section. These will section your HTML web page, and they are extraordinarily useful when you are busy coding and the whole project just gets so big. The section tags and stuff will keep it all nice and ordered, so you can find it whenever you need to, and everything is nice in place. You'll learn more about these once we get deeper into HTML5. So if you don't know what I are yet, don't worry, because I haven't taught you them yet, but we'll get to them soon. HTML page structure. Now, page structures are basically a part of HTML to make reading the code easier. For example, the header. Now, the header usually contains things like the branding, the logo, and stuff like that. It also, these days in newer web pages, contains things like the navigation, which usually actually has its own section, but these days they put it inside of the header. If you don't understand everything clearly in this tutorial just yet, don't worry, I will be having 2 full tutorials dedicated to everything I'm about to teach you guys. Now I'm going to show you guys kind of an example of where you would find this in a web page. I'm going to open up my blog and I'm going to show you guys the header of my blog. Now as you can see, this top part of my blog where it says Netsource blog, and it has all this text at the top that says pin post app games. This is part of the header. Now let's open the console and our element inspector, and as you can see here at the top is a header tag. It tells the person reading this that this is a header. Now the header is usually on top of the page and has no special actual properties, and I will be explaining this more in the next tutorial. So let's continue to the navigation. Now the navigation tag usually defines the navigation of a web page. So this kind of section is specially designed for it. So usually on wiki sites you'll find this little part at the side of the page that tells you where all the content of the page will be, and as soon as you click on it, it will take you to wherever that content is. Usually this is inside of the nav tag. Now because my navigation is at the top and it's basically inside of my header, and that is what I did on my blog. I added the navigation inside of my header. Next up is article. Article usually has all the page's main content inside of it. For example, the reason why the page is actually there. So let's say it's an anime page and it goes about Death Note. Now inside of the article section you'll put everything related to Death Note, and inside of the article section you can also have different sections. Now remember, these sections are just a way of dividing the section from another section, so it's just easier to read. Yet again, the section doesn't have a specific function, and you can even add a section inside of your header or navigation. Section is just there so you can split one thing from another. In the article it will be something like the Death Note's main storyline is in a section, then in a different section you are putting like the side story and maybe the background of the main character. Now my blog doesn't contain any sections because I didn't really believe that much in using sections. Here and there, to make it look better, I would use sections, but I'd rather use a div, which I will get to soon at the end of the video. Now next up is the aside. tag. Now a site just contains extra information that is related to the main content, for example links, and maybe like a note here at the side. It's nothing like it's literally just a little bit on the side. For example, if you take chips with a little bit of sauce at the side, you want it at the side so you can like dip it in, you can take it in like that. So it's not special, it's nothing special to the actual page, it's just something at the side. Next up is footer. This is at the very bottom of your page. You can put it at the top, but it is highly suggested that you put it at the bottom because that's good practice. Now this usually contains information about copyright and privacy policies, terms of use, and so on and so forth. Server has a very nice image which shows you basically how all of them work and how you should put them in line. Now here is the image, and I suggest you take a nice good look at this to get the feeling of how your page is going to be looking after you have added all of these tags to it. Okay, next up is the div tag. Now basically the div tag is a container, and if I have not yet talked about the div tag is basically just something that holds content inside of it. Anything can basically go inside of it, like you know the body tag. Now imagine the div tag is a smaller version of the body tag, and basically you can put whatever content you want inside of a div tag. And most interesting thing is all of this that I just explained is basically other names for a div tag. Footer is a div tag, side is a div tag, article is a div tag, nav is a div tag, and header is a div tag. They are just div tags with different names in order to make the page code more readable. And you can use them wherever you want because they are divs. Divs can be used wherever you want within the body of the HTML page. And basically everything you just saw is just a huge concept of the div tag. And basically you don't even have to use any of these. You can just use divs or not even use divs, but it's highly suggested, especially when we start using CSS, that you know how to use the div tag. I'm not going to go into full detail of the div tag. If you do want to know a little bit more about the div tag, you can go check out a few other videos or go on Solo Learn and try and learn a little bit more there. As you can see here on my webpage, I have a lot of div tags trying to give everything a little space. And as you can see, this will actually all work along with my CSS. You can't see the CSS right now, but all of these divs has a function within the CSS. Doing the header, nav, and footer. Now first up is the header. By now you should know how to create a tag. If you don't, please go watch my HTML videos and then come back to watch the HTML5 videos later. Now you do know how to create a header tag because you do know how to create a tag. So you create your header tag. Now usually inside of a header tag you have your most important heading, which is your site heading, and you have the lesser important heading, which you don't always need, but you can also add. Now the less important heading is just a smaller heading, just like a subheading. And you know what, I'll show you guys how a heading looks. Now the header is often on top of the page where it actually should be. It doesn't have to be, but it's good practice to put a header on the top. Now the header can contain more than just normal text like H1 to H6 and to P. It can contain things like images and music. It can contain anything you want. The header is just a div tag. A div tag is a container that can hold basically anything and just breaks your page up into a bunch of sections. The header is just another name for it that helps you know where what is when you want to know where it is, so it's easier to navigate from place to place. Basically, to imagine it, imagine you are a web developer reading someone else's code. What would you want to do? Would you want to be able to read it and know exactly what's going on, or would you just rather want it to be messy? You want to be able to read it, right? Because if you see a header, then voila, you know exactly where you are, what that part represents on the page. Now let me show you here how the header looks on my page. Now we'll just open our developer options. That will bring out the thing at the side. Control Shift I, yes, and then we don't need a console, we need a dashboard right there. Now as you can see inside the body, we have our header tag, which is the part right here. Yeah, you see. Then inside of the header tag we have the nav tag. Now I will explain a bit later about what the nav tag is. Now this part right here should have been the header, but I decided not to make it a header because I have the Netsuite block image, which I think is actually kind of a better header for the page itself. So the latest block verse is not actually inside of the header, where it should technically be. Now the header doesn't do anything specific to your page, like give it a better look or anything like that. It's just to make the code look better, so when someone looks at the code without looking at the web page itself, they will be able to actually know exactly what's going on. Now let's quickly show you that the header is just basically something else in, and you will understand why we use things like this more once we get deeper into HTML5. Now as you can see, everything looks exactly the same as what it would have looked if we did not use a header. Now you might think this is useless right now, but you will find out later why we would use this more often than not. So yeah, let's continue to the footer tag. Okay, wait, before we go on towards the footer, it's important to know that the header does not replace the head tag. These two are completely different things. If you're going to switch them, you might mess up your web page. Please do not switch these two around. The head should stay the head, the header should stay the header. The head should not be inside of the body, but on top of it. The header can be inside of the body. Now the footer is just as easy as the header. You just put the word inside these two tags. Now the footer usually comes at the bottom of your page. Like the header is on the top, the footer is on the bottom. Head is on the top of your body, your feet is at the bottom of your body. You get it? Now the following stuff can go inside of the footer tag. It is your contact information, privacy policy, social media like links and icons, terms of service, copyright information, and related websites. Now of course, same with the header, you can still put images, music, whatever you want inside a footer. It's also just a div tag with a different name. It is just generally used to hold these things. Now my web page doesn't have a footer yet, but I will give you an example of what would be here. For example, I will tell the person thank you for visiting the page. You can find more of what you want on this page at my YouTube channel, and I'll just give them a link towards it. This is just a little something that you'll put in there. Usually you can put a little bit more inside your footer tag, just take up a little bit of extra space, and just make it look nice. As you can see, the footer tag doesn't actually do anything else either. It is just like the header tag. It is basically a div tag, just with a different name. It doesn't make it look better. It doesn't give it any special actual meaning. It's just when you read the code, you understand where you are and what you are busy reading. It makes the whole process a lot easier. I should have done this actually before the footer, but anyways, next up is the Nav Tag. Now the Nav Tag is just basically where your navigation bar would be. It is basically where you throw all your links to other web pages and stuff like that. It usually holds like a ton of links, like for example your home, services, about us. When you go into like a Wikipedia page, for example, you would find this part at the side of the page, which you would have seen if you watched my earlier video, which I showed you. Basically, you would find that little square at the side with all the links, and it takes you to the place on the page. That's a navigation bar, or a nav tag for short. Now, this is usually just a block to contain a bunch of links. Because if it's just one link, you don't need a navigation or a nav tag at all. If it's a bunch of links, like 5 or 6 or even 10, then a nav tag is just a useful way of telling the person reading this, hey, this is where all my tons of links are going to other pages and stuff like that. Now I'll give you a quick example of how it will basically look, with 3 things in it saying home, services, and about us. Not actually going anywhere, just showing you guys what it basically does. Now you don't have to style it like I do, I just think it looks nice adding an unordered list to it. As you can see, it basically looks like an actual place to navigate your page with. Now the nav tag is basically exactly the same as the footer and the header. It's just a div tag with a different name. You can put whatever you want in it once again, and it just makes it everything easier to read. Nothing really special about it. Now as you saw on my webpage, I had the nav tag inside of my header tag. Now you can do this, but basically any of your tags, usually people put like a div tag around everything and they just put everything inside the div tag. You can put the tags inside of each other just as much as you want, as much as you need it to be. It's not important to put them all outside of each other. You will get more used to this as we continue with the tutorial. About the article, section, and aside elements in HTML. Now if you haven't watched my previous video just yet, please click on this pop-up box right here at the top of the screen and go watch that one first, because you'll be a little bit confused, or not confused, but you'll be a little bit behind if you haven't watched that already. Now I found it quite difficult to find a very good way to explain this to you, but I will be quoting from Sullivan right now what it says about it, because I feel like this is actually perfect. Article is a self-contained independent piece of content that can be used and distributed separately from the rest of the page or site. This could be a forum post, magazine, newspaper, article, a blog entry, a comment, an interactive widget or gadget, or any other independent piece of content. Now this can technically mean it is the main page or the main part of the page, or maybe even a side part. It doesn't necessarily need to be the main part. I don't actually have any good examples of this, because I haven't actually seen people using the article in many web pages so far, but I'm pretty sure if you were to go Google something that included an article, you'll probably find it after a while. Now another thing that is often found is an article within an article called a nested article. Now these are usually something that would be representing the blog post of your page, meaning it's kind of like redirecting the user kind of back to the original content of the page. Next up is a section. Now a section is basically just a div which you would use to section up your page like section 1, section 2, section 3, and so on and so forth. Now I love using the sections. You don't necessarily need to, you can actually just use a div, but you will usually find these things inside of either the body or an article, and it's useful especially when you do blogs, because you can section up your blog into different parts of the blog. Like the first section is maybe about women, the second section is about men, you know. Now I'm going to show you an example of where I use the section inside of my blog, and then we can just show you how I used it. Now all HTML coders have their own way of doing this. The way I used my section is where most people would have used a div, because just to like, or an aside or something, because I added instructions instead of something, well, that will actually give a reason to be called a section. I just like using the section because it's nice to, you know, break up my page into sections instead of divs. And let me quickly show you the example. Now if we go to the apps and games option and open the Asteroid game, I will show you just where it is. Now inside of the home.html, you will see if we go down here, there is a div which I wasn't really using a lot, and then there is the section. Now as you can see, my instructions, the move, the forward, left, right, my instructions are inside of the section. I technically sectioned it aside from the page, kind of like an instruction section, if you understand where I'm going through. Next up is the aside element. Now the aside is technically considered completely separate from the original reason behind the original theme and stuff of the page, but it's still kind of like indirectly connected to the main theme of the page. Now when you nest a section, there is usually the thing about, if let's say you nest it inside of an article, which is a side part of your page, right? Now if you were to section it inside of that article, then, or nest it inside of that article, then technically the side will only be considered slightly still connected to the new section of the article and not to the blog anymore. But if the aside is outside of the article and in the normal blog or on the web page, then it should be technically kind of still linked to the original content. Now let's say the article went about winning an iPhone. Now the aside would be something like, the iPhone would be shipped to wherever you are within insert number of workdays. And since it's not technically concerned about the article saying, hey, you can win something, read this, and then it tells them how they can win, the aside will say just when will it arrive, if they win. So today we'll be discussing the HTML audio element. So remember, before HTML5 there was no actual standard way of playing audio files on your web page. So today I'll be showing you how to do it. Now, okay, so first let's explain. You have the audio element which you use to define an audio thing. Now here I have an audio file in .mp3. So let's copy the name, then paste it right in between the source attribute. Now you do know how to do an image by now, so you do know the .mp3 is very important. Now you can do this using a link as well, just like with an image. The controls attribute allows you to have a play and mute option on your audio element on the web page. Now this text inside of the audio means that if the browser does not support audio elements, then this text will show up. So it's kind of like the alt. When the browser cannot show an image, then you will receive the text. You remember? So if you have not watched my video on how to add an image to a web page, please go watch it right now so you can have some reference on how this works. Now let's quickly play it and see if it works. Now as you can see, it does work, which means we did everything correctly. Now there is another way to do the audio element. For example, you can use an audio kind of like in container. Let's call this the audio container. Now the audio container contains things like source instead of audio. It works kind of exactly the same, except you need to add what type it is, because when you start with videos you'll kind of understand. Now basically, if the browser can't play the first one because it doesn't support MP3, and you have the same audio file but in OGG, then you can add it as well for in case the browser supports OGG but not MP3. You can also add your alt text. Now next up, let's explain autoplay. This kind of explains itself. It autoplays the song. Now not all browsers support this. For example, Opera Mini does not actually support autoplay, and I had a rough time implementing this into my Naruto game that I'm making. For example, as you can see, it's not autoplaying. But if we were to open this in Internet Explorer /Edge, it would actually autoplay because the browser supports it. For example, look at this. Now, as you heard, it did in fact autoplay. Now, loop basically also explains itself. It loops the audio. And that is how the loop works, guys. Now the audio element does only support 3 types of audios. This includes MP3, WAV and OGG, which means not all types of audios you might have will work, but it might work, you know. Thank you all for watching. See you all in the next video. So in this tutorial you will see the video element is a lot like the audio element. Okay, so let's get started. First off, we need a video element. Easy enough, right? But before we go to anything else, we gotta add in controls attribute. After that, it's almost exactly like the audio element. You need a source element inside of the video element. If you watched my previous video, you would know exactly what I'm talking about and what should everything go inside of the source element. Now, as an example, here I have a video called demo.mp4, which is my last video. We will be adding the demo video to the web page and play it. So we will add an src, and just inside of that we will just link the video. And something to always remember is always to add a .mp4 after the video or whatever the extension is called, because that is very important when it comes to the name of the video. Now it is generally good practice to add in type as well. If you have seen my last video, you would know what I'm talking about. And just make type video /mp4. It's good practice, but I didn't do it because it's not per se necessary, but it's still good practice. Now, unlike the audio element, the video element doesn't always give you the size that you want, so most of the time you will have to resize it, which is pretty easy to do, and by now you should be able to do it by yourself. But anyways, let's help you just do it and just make the width, let's say around 200. Now, as you can see, it worked perfectly fine. Now let's quickly show you what happens if you remove the controls. Now as you can see, it's just a blank screen. This is why we recommend that you always add controls. Unless you're going to configure it to do exactly what you want without the user needing to give their input, we suggest you always, and I mean always, add controls. Now we can also resize this to be a little bit bigger because I feel like that's a little bit small. Now, just like the audio element, you can add another source which will be linking it to the same video file but differently encoded. For example, demo.ogg or .mkv. Don't use mkv, it's not supported by most browsers as far as I know. Now as you can see, I don't have in demo.ogg, so if the browser doesn't support MP4, it won't be going to OGG, it will directly be going to the text because we don't have a file called demo.ogg, so we can just comment that out. Now for the extra attributes you can add to your video element. Now, just like the audio element, it has basically all the same attributes. So you can add in loop as well as an autoplay. But note, autoplay doesn't work on Opera Mini or any Opera as far as I know, so autoplay won't work when I try it here. So let's open this up on Edge. Now as you can see, it did autoplay, so it does work on Edge. Now let's add the loop as well. Now as you can see, it did start over after I send it to the end. Now one last thing to note about working with the video attribute is that browsers actually only support about 3 of the extensions. This includes .mp4, .webm, and .ogg. Now you can just search up what all of these are and how they work, and yeah. So today we'll be talking about the progress element in HTML5. The progress element allows you to create a progress bar anywhere within the body of your HTML. Now you're allowed to put your progress bar anywhere, and as an example, I'll be putting my progress bar within 2 h3 tags. Okay, so let's pretend we are busy downloading something. Now we're going to make the progress bar look like we're almost done downloading some form of content. The progress element has one opening and one closing tag. The progress bar has a minimum of 2 attributes, one max and one value. Max is usually set to 100 for percentages from 0 to 100%. Value is how far the progress bar is filled up. We can make ours somewhere around maybe 50. Usually a progress bar will also have an attribute of minimum, but it is not required. Now as we refresh our page, you can see we have a progress bar that is filled up until halfway. Do not be fooled by the opening and closing tags of this progress bar. You cannot put anything inside the middle of the progress because it does not show it. So do not be fooled by this, because I have been fooled quite a lot of times. You might be thinking, but what use is this to you? Well, once you start learning more about JavaScript, you'll be able to make the progress bar actually fill up if something is loading or being done. So today we're going to be talking about SVGs, how they work, what they are, and how to import images that are SVG. Now, SVG stands for Scalable Vector Graphics. SVG is one of the two main methods used to draw things in HTML. It has several things you can draw with it. These things include paths, which are lines, boxes, which are squares, circles, text, and graphic images. Today we'll just be focusing on the graphic images for the most part. Also, a good thing to know is SVGs are not pixel based, which means you can zoom in as much as you want and you will never, and I mean never, lose quality. Now let's start talking about images. Now, SVG images are almost like normal images, but on the other hand, they are not. For one, they do not lose quality, and second, you can use them for things like social media icons and stuff like that. Here you can see I have an image called youtube.svg. Now let's quickly add this to our web page. You just put it in a normal image element and you're good to go. Always remember to put the extension after the name, youtube.svg. Now this is how the SVG looks. Looks just like an image, right? But when you zoom in, you can see that the quality only stays the same. It doesn't decrease at all. Now this SVG was made by this person right here. The link to the site will be in the description, so you can find your own SVG images. Now, this site you can use to find a bunch of different images and add them to your web page. So let's find a Twitter image, like the Twitter icon. And also something to remember while you're on this page is you should credit the people who made the SVG images. It's just fair, you know. Even if you download them and then use them on a web page, please still credit their creators. Now there are a variety of images to choose, colored or not colored, it's up to you, but we will just be choosing a normal image. Now take notice of this pop-up box right here. As I said, please credit him. This is the guy who created the Twitter SVG. Now back to coding the web page. Now we have just downloaded the image, so let's just add it to our folder where all our other things are at, and then we can add it to the web page. Now we can just copy the image element we have right here and then paste it right underneath it, and voila, there's the SVG. Now this is all actually to this. The images are basically just normal images that has a high quality to it. Now, SVG is basically a box. It is almost like the Div Tag, but it is specially made in order to keep types of drawings like circles and stuff. So the first thing you have to do is you have to set the width and the height of an SVG. Now, just like a div, it's basically the same, it works in pixels. Basically everything we're going to be working with is going to be with pixels. Now you won't automatically see an SVG, you have to add some CSS to it. So just say style, border becomes 1px solid black, and you will be able to see it and be more in hand with it. So you can see until where it can go and stuff like that. Now as you can see, after we set the width and height of the SVG, you can actually see it with the border. Now let's just change up the width and height so we have enough space. This is not just per se good practice, but putting it as big as possible also gives you a huge amount of space you can draw on, and for the purpose of this video we'll be doing that. But we won't be making it that big, we'll just be making it big enough so you can see it fit inside of the screen. If you need or want to, you can make it as big as you want, it has no actual limit. But when you make one, you should make sure to make it just as big as it needs to be and not any bigger. Okay, so next up, inside of the Svg tag, we're going to create a circle. To create a circle, we need a circle tag. Most elements in an SVG is self-closing, so you don't have to worry about closing them with another element of the same name. First up, we have the CX. CX is the x-axis from where the circle is, and CY is the y-axis from where the circle is. We'll be explaining this a little bit more later. R, which stands for radius, is the actual size of the circle. Remember, all of this is still in pixels. As a beginner, I suggest you just create a few comments to help you remember these things, and yeah. Now next up we have the fill attribute. Now the fill attribute is basically the color the circle will be, or the color that any of the shapes will be when you draw them. Let's make it green, and when we refresh the page you should see a green circle. So let's just add this comment in here that says fill is the color of the circle, and in stroke we'll explain more about that later. It's kind of like the border of the circle. Let's refresh. As you can see, we have a green circle. Now let's quickly explain the X and Y. This is the y-axis. It starts from the top left corner, and that is the x-axis, also starting from the top left corner. As you go more down or more right, it changes the amount, it increases it. So let's change the x-axis, and you will see the circle moves a little bit to the right because we set the x-axis to be a little bit further from the point, which is 0. The y-axis will make it go downwards because the point which is 0, the top left, is now 400. The radius will just increase the size, and we can also change the fill color to any other color we want. Let's make this white and then give it a stroke of black, so we can see just a black circle stroke. As you can see, we just have the outline which is black. Next up we have something a little less complicated than a circle, a rect element. Now rect can make anything from a rectangle to a square to anything that has basically 4 sides. Now this has a width and a height attribute, which makes it slightly easier than a circle's just radius, because we have the CX and the CY, which can confuse you into thinking that's the size, which it is not. Then you have the X, which stands for the x-axis, from how far from the top left it should go right, and then the y-axis, from how far from the top left downwards it should go. And then we have the fill and the stroke, which is basically the same as with the circle. Now if we refresh, we can see a red rectangle with a black stroke. Now don't get confused, because this is just an X and that is an CX. They both mean the same thing. One is just made specifically for a circle, the other one is made for a rectangle. To prove it, we can test it out and change the X and Y axis a little. As you can see, it's kind of having the same effect as with the circle. Now the SVG is basically a box, so if you're going to make it go further than the box itself, it's going to cut it off. So this is why you should resize it to whichever size you need it to be. Now you can also change the y-axis, which is just the rectangle's way of saying CY, but it's just a Y. Now this was quite a lot to take in one video, so I suggest you just go practice this a little bit, because we just want to get this ingrained into your head. So right here we have a page. It doesn't do anything yet. and we have our Svg element, and inside our Svg element we're going to draw a line. So within this we will have a line element. Now inside of the line element we have two types of coordinates, x1, y1, x2, y2. Now these are really important that you can understand them. x1 and y1 are their starting positions of the line. If you watch my previous video, this shouldn't look too hard, but the x-axis, it starts at 10 with the x-axis on this demonstration right here, and on the y-axis it also starts at 10. Then on the second x, x2, this is where it ends. x2 and y2 is exactly where it ends. So it ends at x coordinate 200 and y coordinate 100. Now if we're going to refresh the page, nothing should happen. That is why in order to see it, we shall be adding some CSS. So we shall just say style, and then we will make the stroke color black. Stroke just means the line. So now if we refresh the page, you can see one beautiful line right there. Also, as you can see, it starts from 10 pixels from the top and the left, and then it ends at the ton of pixels from the y and the x-axis. See, so this is x1 and x2. Let's see here. As you can see there, we have x1 and x2, and yeah, so first let's continue with the style and then we can explain that a little bit later. So right now we can also add the stroke width. The stroke width will just say how thick the line should be. So now let's refresh the page, and as you can see, the line has become thick. Next up is the stroke line cap. This says how the stroke will look at its ends. So we want a rounded end. So we will just say stroke line cap round. This will make the ends of the stroke less, as you can see, less squarey and more round. So now in order to let you understand it, I actually want you to do this with me, or do it at your own time actually, and just figure it out yourself. We're going to be playing with where the line ends and begins, so we can show you how it works, because if you watch my previous video, this shouldn't be too hard to capture, but it's also not too easy. So remember, x1 and y1 is where the line starts. If you remember my previous video, where our squares and stuff had an x and y axis, and it's where it started. x1 and y1 is that, and x2 and y2 basically defines how long it should be, because that is where it ends. It's the coordinate where the line ends. If you know some basic maths, this shouldn't be too hard for you to understand. So now let's play around with it, and we can change the y-axis and make it a little bigger. If we refresh the page, you can see the line went downwards because the y-axis is right there. Now let's make the x-axis a little bit smaller, so the line will be somewhat shorter and a little bit more to the left side of the page. If you have watched my previous video, you should be getting what's going on by now. Now to make it easier to understand, we're going to make the y-axis exactly the same height as the first part. So y1 and y2 is exactly the same now. And as you can see, x-axis extends the length to according to the x-axis, you know. And now let's make x the same as what it was as x1, and then y2 we can extend to make it longer. As you can see, it goes downwards more because that's where the y-axis is. Now if you don't completely understand, I suggest you take 10 minutes of your time and just do this on your own. Just practice it and you'll figure it out on your own, because we as humans are just capable of doing that. Right now we'll be going to polylines, and polylines are slightly harder to understand than normal lines. And yeah, so come back after you have practiced it, or continue watching if you completely understand what's happening. Okay, now that you hopefully understand all about the line, we can continue to the polyline. So let's create our polyline SVG. Now, what is a polyline? It is basically a line just extended and can turn around. The line element is only one line and can only go up until one part. You don't want a ton of line elements attaching to one another because it's going to be a lot of effort. So we have the polyline, which you can create eyes or circles or whatever with, and by adding a bunch of points to it. I have a video where I use these to make an anime eye. I'll leave the link in the description, or a pop-up will pop up. Now, how a polyline looks is basically, let's just do this. Okay, that's a little bit big. Okay, so a polyline is basically this. It extends and makes a bunch of, you can see a bunch of places where it just turns randomly. Now, a line is just basically a boring dot, while a polyline is basically a little bit different, as you could see. Now let's get started by explaining it. Now, a nice thing to do is you can extend your whole element so you have more space. So you just do that if you feel it's more comfortable to have a lot of space to look at. Now, first up, we can add the CSS. So let's make the stroke line joint meter. Now, you remember how the line looked before we made it round? Yeah, it's going to look like that each time the line turns. Now, we can make the stroke color black and the stroke width 12. Now, if you watch my previous video, you will well know what fill means. But if you didn't, fill means that you are giving it a color on the inside. Once you connect a polyline into like some sort of shape, for example a square, if you use fill, it will color in the inside of it. Now, if you would refresh the page, you would find nothing. Now, we're going to be working with points. Point attribute is basically you adding x and y dots to the whole SVG element. Now, it's going to be like this. You make a points attribute, you equal it, and you say x1, y1. Next part, x2, y2. Then you start again, x1, y1, but this one will create a new line. So let's continue. So we have one line here, but it's only x1 and y1. Let's extend it so it has an x2 and y2. Now, if we have that and we refresh the page, we should have a normal line. As you can see, there is our line. But this isn't a polyline yet. This is just a normal line. As you can see, it has an x1, y1, x2, y2 right there. Now we're going to basically add an x free and a y free. Now you will finally understand what a polyline is after we have done this. Now, as you can see, we added a new part to it. We made its x-axis 200 and its y-axis 100. Let's add one more part so we can help you guys like understand this. So let's give it another x and y, and as you can see, it continues going to where you set it. Now, I personally suggest you all try this on your own for a while and just get the hang of it, because at the beginning it might be pretty hard to understand. Now, if you remove the line joint, nothing will be different because it is kind of, meter is basically the default. Now we'll be adding a few more so you can just also get the hang of what will be happening here when you set it to whichever you set it. Now first, what you want to do is you want to make it round. So now if you look at the corners, they were rounded. Now this is basically exactly the same as the one we used with the lines. Now there's also another one which is called, I'm hoping that I'm saying it right, but it's called bevel. Now this just makes your line look like it's being cut off from where it is. As you can see, it's kind of like a straight there. It doesn't really look nice to me, but you can use it. Then there's one more called inherit. Now I'm going to not explain inherit right now. Once we get started with CSS, I'll be explaining all about it. Now right now it won't do anything, but once you get started with CSS, you will understand what I mean. We'll be finishing off the drawing part with ellipse and polygon. These two aren't exceptionally hard, so you shouldn't struggle too much to understand them if you watch my previous videos. Now, the ellipse is a lot like the circle, except you can change how much the horizontal and vertical axis should be. For example, should the horizontal axis be 150? But like usually you could change the radius of a circle, right? But with an ellipse, you can change the radius height and the radius width, like Rx and Ry. So let me show this to you. Now Rx will be the circle width and Ry would be the circle height. Now you see when I refresh the page, we won't have a circle, but we will have an ellipse. Now right here, as you can see, that X represents here the width of the ellipse. That Y would represent the height. Now if you were to change this, it will become either longer or shorter depending on how we change it. Now if the Rx and Ry would have been exactly the same, it would create a normal circle. I suggest you just practice this a little bit. You will get it into your head pretty soon, and just toy around with it. Now let's continue to the polygon. Now the polygon is a lot like the polyline in most ways. The only thing that actually changes the polygon from the polyline is that the lines close itself. Note that you need at least 3 lines to create a polygon, since if you only have 2 lines it can't really close, as you would say. So you need a point where it starts, a point to where the first line would finish, and then a point where the second line would finish, and then it will automatically close off by giving itself an extra line. Now here we have enough points, so let's refresh, and as you can see there we have a triangle, which is the polygon. Now let's just let you see the outline of it by giving it a stroke color of black and a fill color of green. And here's a nice fact of the day. Did you know polygon comes from the Greek word poly, which means many, and gon, which means angle. So it means many angle, or as you would say, many angles. Now let me show you the polyline and the polygon. Now if we were to change these numbers, you would see that it would have exactly the same effect as it would have had if it was a polyline. As you can see, that one went a bit further in, whereas since we increased the x-axis on which it lied, and now it went back to where it was. And you can play with this and you will understand how close this actually is to the polyline. So just to show you as an example how close it really is, I'm quickly going to change the element name to Polyline. Now let's refresh, and well, that's not very helpful. Okay, let's quickly remove the green so I can show you how it looks if it were to be a polyline. Okay, and let's refresh now. As you can see, there is no closing line if this were to be a polyline. But if we were to change this to a polygon again, then you would see it would automatically close itself off. Now isn't that amazing? So today we'll be doing the animate of the SVG. Now, if you followed my other SVG tutorials, you'll know how to draw SVGs. So now we're going to show you how to move them about. So let's create our SVG with our rectangle in it. Alright, now we're going to start with the animate. So animate is a self-closing tag which you put in between the rectangle. Right here in this video, while I was recording it, I accidentally didn't put between the rectangle because I'm used to closing off the rectangle, since I barely ever use animate. So you create your animate tag, you give it an attribute name of either X or Y. Attribute name determines whether your animation will move with the X or the Y axis. If you watched my previous videos, you will definitely understand this part. Then you add a from and a to. This will say from where, how many pixels XY will it move X or Y. So if it's from 0, that is from where it starts, to 300, that it will move up 300 pixels. Then you add the dir, which will determine how long it is. We will just make it about 3 seconds, doesn't need to be very long. And then fill, you can either make it freeze or you can make it remove. If you say remove, it will return to where its starting position is at the end of the animation. If you say freeze, it will not return to its starting animation, and it will end at its finishing animation. We will show you that later. Then the repeat count is how many times the animation will repeat. Let's just make that 2. The animation won't work because I never put the rectangle over the animate. So let's quickly do that. 3, 2, 1. There we go. So now the animation should work without any problems. Okay, so now let's quickly show you what fill does. Now let's remove the freeze and put remove there. So it was freeze and it stayed here at its end position. Now if I'm going to refresh it and play it again, when it finishes it won't be there, it will be at its starting position. Now let's quickly change the attribute name to Y so I can show you it will now go up and down and not left to right. Let's also make the animation shorter so it doesn't last as long. As you can see, it now goes from up to down. Now you can play around with this, it can get sometimes very fun, and if you play around with it enough, it can actually crash your browser, which I have done in the past. Now you can make it repeat forever by making the repeat count indefinite, which will just make it go infinitely as many times as you want it to. Basically, it will never stop. So this time we're going to be talking about Svg Paths. Now this is a little bit harder than the rest we did, but if you did watch my previous videos, this should come pretty easily to you and you shouldn't struggle too much. So let's get started. Now Svg has 10 types of commands. I'll be explaining them later on, so let's first name them. First we have M, which means move to, L, which means line to, H, which means horizontal line to, V, vertical line to, C, curve to, S, smooth curve to, Q, quadratic Bezier curve, T, smooth quadratic Bezier curve to, A, elliptical arc, and Z, closed path. Now it is normal for you to not be able to remember all of these at once, so first take in all the commands, and then after we have done this tutorial, just go through it, just practice it a little bit, because we're going to go through each and every command. We're just going to go through the most usual commands you would see. If you haven't seen my eye video I made about drawing an anime eye, we use this the method to do it. So after the video you can maybe go watch it and then you can see for yourself what you can do with Svg Paths. Now first off, we'll need to create an Svg element. Now I recommend you go to VSchools or SoloLearn to go through this yourself and just like learn what all the other words that I'm not going to be covering means. Or you can just try them all out yourself by coding and stuff until you know which each of these letters represents. Now after you have created your SVG, you would want to create your path element. Now to make your path move, you gotta give it an attribute of D and then equal it and then all your instructions. Now this is really just like the normal SVG you draw, but it's slightly different. So now you start with M, which means move to, and you give it a 0, 0 or 1, 100, or just where it should start from, you know. 0, 0 is the best place to start from. I wouldn't suggest anything else really, and I suggest those two are also the same. Then you start with line 2, and this will draw a line from wherever you've made it move to the line 2. So let's make it 200, 200, they will move from 0 to 200. And then we can just give a style, which will just give it a stroke of black and a fill of none because we don't want it to fill up, we want to see the lines. Now as you can see, we have a line that ranges from 0 all the way to x and y 200. Now the next part is optional if you have a line, if you're still lining too. You can either use a comma and put your stuff afterwards like I did, or you don't have to use a comma, but then you give it another L, which means line 2 yet again, like that. I don't really like doing that because it takes slightly more time, or it just doesn't look as nice, you know, because later on it can really get to become a big piece of code and you don't really want that. And Z is just to automatically close it off by adding another line. Now isn't that beautiful? Now just for the sake of fun, I'm going to show you guys how to make a quadratic Bezier curve. Now to get this curve, you need to give it two types of attributes to the D. Now with a line 2, you just give it 1 because it's 200, 200. But with a quadratic Bezier curve, you need to give it a 2 numbers, comma, and another 2 numbers because it needs to kind of curve, you know. So let me show you an example of how this would look. Now I'm just going to take this L and make that a Q and then add another 2 numbers after the comma. Now this will just take it back to where it was, or where it started off with, which you can just use a Z for. So let's make those two values a little bit bigger, and then later on, or wait, let's first remove it. Let's show you what happens if you don't. That's all that happens if you don't put an extra value in. So you put in your extra values, let's make it a little bit bigger so you can see how nice the curve can be if you do it correctly. As you can see, that's actually pretty beautiful, or at least to me. And now you can just add a Z and it will close itself off. And there you go. That's all there is to it, guys. So today we'll be starting with the HTML5 forms. Now a form is basically what you fill in to, let's say, contact someone or maybe buy something online. You know, it's kind of something like that. So the HTML5 one is basically done almost the same as the HTML4 one, which we will not be going through because we're doing HTML5 since it's the new and improved and everything of everything, you know. Okay, let's just forget that part. Okay, so I'm going to be showing you guys an example of what a form is. We're going to my site and showing you guys basically what it looks like. So if we click here on the contact me option, then you will see how a form looks. Now note this doesn't work yet or anything. So this is a form. You enter your name, your email address, and then maybe a message or text or something. And then you can like send me something and I might even reply, but it doesn't work yet, so don't go try it. Yeah, this is basically a basic form. Of course there are more things you can do, and there are probably other things you should put into a form. Note, a form does not work with just HTML. You need some, I think, some JavaScript and definitely some PHP. Okay, so first we create a form tag. Then inside of this form tag we will add an input tag. This is where you input text and emails and stuff like that. So inside of the input tag you have a name attribute. Now the name attribute comes most handy in some JavaScript and PHP, so we won't be going through this right now. Maybe once we start with PHP and stuff like that, I will start explaining this to you guys more, so then you will be actually using this. Also some other HTML features that go along with it, we might be talking about that in the next video. Just note, the name can be anything you want as long as it doesn't have things in like dots and, you know, just illegal characters, which I think we did talk about that, so I will be going over it again. Okay, then we have our type attribute. So you have a type like submit, which is basically a button which will submit something, which you usually put at the end of a form. Or you have a type of text which will give you a bunch of options to input text, for example your name or just a story you want to put in, but you know, we can just add a text box for that. Then you also have like an email for if you want to put in an email specifically. There are more, but we will be going to those a little bit later. Now let's see how it looks. And there we go. So here we have a ton of options that we can choose from, which is obviously your most recent options. You can turn that off if you want, but we'll be getting to that later as well. Then we have the label attribute. Now this is important because they won't just know what to enter. You gotta give them something like a label, you know, just to tell them. So you can just like put your name there, for example. Like inside the label attribute, like put your name here or enter your email address. So we're just going to say your name, and as you can see, if we refresh it, there is your name. Now on my webpage it's a little bit different, we don't have that, so yeah. Now here we have another input, just as an example. So we're going to give it a placeholder. Now placeholder is some text inside of the input to give the user an example of what they should insert. Just don't mind the for attribute, we'll get to that sometime later. Now as you can see, there is some text inside of this input, email@example.com. Now that's a placeholder. Now we also have the autofocus attribute, which if you add it to like an input, it will automatically focus onto that input, so when the user goes to that page they can start typing inside of it immediately and stuff. This is suggested for when you like need them to like start entering the name from like the top or something. Don't put it very down at the bottom because that might irritate them, like in a text box. You don't want to put it there down at the bottom in a text box, because you know they first want to enter their name and email and stuff before they get there. Now remember how it gave you suggestions to complete the text for you? If you put autocomplete off on the form, it won't give you those extra options to add to your form anymore. So when you click on it, you won't get any pop-up saying, hey, do you want to enter this or something to your form, which I don't really like. I think it's generally bad, but you know, you can turn it off if you don't want it. Okay, so next we're going to add an input called submit. So just remember, this is just like a button. There's nothing really specifically special about it. It's just when you want to submit a form. Now you can do this with a button as well, but it's generally good practice to just use an input and make it a type of submit. Now the submit button also has a value option. Now the value is what is inside of the submit button. So the submit means the button says submit. But if you're going to change the value to anything else, the button's name will change. For example, let's make it submit now. So now the button will be called submit now. So next up is the required attribute. Now if you need someone to enter something like their email, then you add the required attribute to the input. This means when they press submit and they have not entered anything into that input, like we're going to be doing now, it will say please fill out this, because they need to, since it is required. Okay, so now I'm going to show you guys a few other types of inputs you can give people. Now we will start with the color input. Now here, as you can see, you can choose a bunch of colors. Pretty nice, right? Next up is one of the 10,000 date types you get. So this date basically asks you to insert the date, day, month, and years. Now the month type is one of the other ton of types you get. So then you just insert basic info about the month. Now the number type is basically a way to get people to only insert numbers and no letters. This also makes when a phone clicks on it, they get like that number pad and they can only click on numbers. Good when you need people to insert their mobile phone numbers. Another nice thing about the number type is that it can only give you a maximum and a minimum value. So the person can't go over the maximum and they can't go below the minimum. Which means if they try and go below my 5, it will say it's gotta be 5. And if they try to go above my 10, it will be like, no, it's gotta be 10. Thank you all for watching. See you all in the next video. For more things you can enter, go to WeSchools or Solo Learn, and you can go take an HTML course there, and they will give you a ton of other things you can use, or you can just Google it. Okay, so let's create our first search bar for the video, and just a normal search bar, nothing special. So this is just normal search box, there's nothing special about it yet. Now we're going to create a drop-down list. So let me show you an example. Let's open up YouTube, since I think YouTube has a pretty darn good example of what a drop-down menu is. Kind of for a drop-down menu for your input box. So kind of more like a drop-down list. Now when I click and start typing in there, you'll see a bunch of options coming down to see how much options there are of what you can choose to finish your sentence quickly. So this is a drop down list. We're going to be creating that. So first off, to create your list, you gotta give your input attribute of list so it knows where it fits in, to which list it should assign itself to. Next up, you create a data list. This data list should have an ID, the same name as your list name in your input. Inside of your data list, you should have elements called option. Option is the drop-down list. Then the value, the attribute value of the option, will be what is inside of the block that is presented to you. So we will just select colors. Now as you can see, there's a drop down list and you can choose whichever color you like. Now I actually created a perfect example for this quite a while ago. So let's go into my folders and open it up. Now as you can see here, there's a drop down list with me and someone else's name on here. And then when you click here on attribute, you can see a ton of options dropping down, and once you select one and click confirm, it will give you the result of whichever you asked for.
Note, being able to do that does need some JavaScript knowledge, which we will not be going into right now. Now, as you could see with the names, it had being specifically made for a drop-down list because it was my name and someone else's name, but you couldn't actually type into it. Now, this is called a select. It uses options as well, but instead of having a value, you have to add a closing option tag and then add something in between there. Now, as you can see, if we were to refresh right now, you will see that we have a ton of options in that drop-down list.
Thank you all for watching. This was the very last part you had to see. Now this video was made possible by SolarLearn. I basically followed their course step by step but gave you all my perspective on it. So now you all should be able to go get your own certificates from SolarLearn in your HTML course. Next up we'll be doing some Delphi, but after I finish making my whole CSS course, we'll be giving you a CSS tutorial where you can also afterwards go get your certificate. Now there are more videos if you guys are interested in seeing them. I have a whole playlist full of HTML videos and you guys should feel free to come watch them and maybe improve your HTML skills. The best way to improve your skills are to constantly practice them. I suggest you follow a few channels which I'll link in the description, which does HTML and CSS things for you. So maybe once you start learning CSS you can start following them, but they are there anyway, so you can start watching their videos if you want and follow along. Maybe you can learn a few things before I even teach you CSS. Thank you all for watching, and it's been a pleasure teaching you all some HTML. See you all in the next tutorial.